Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be. I'm Michelle McLean, Director of Product Marketing. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. I'm going to step through a couple of logistics, and then we'll get started on the content. So we've muted the lines because we record these webinars, but we definitely want to hear from you. So please use the chat window in the bottom of your screen. We'd like to take questions throughout today's webinar, so ping us whenever you like, whenever you have a question. And then if most of these slides are fairly sparse, they're not horribly dense, we haven't thrown a lot of diagrams at you, but if you ever do want to toggle over into full screen mode, feel free to do so. That's in the top right window for you. So first off, one very unfortunate programming change. The folks at OG&E are not able to join us today because of a conflict. So we're really disappointed by that, but we understand. And what they've given us the opportunity to do is inject the perspective that they were going to attempt to provide. Obviously, they would have done a better job than we will, but they gave us the opportunity to highlight different aspects of their program as it makes sense as we move through the content of this webinar. So hopefully they can join us at another date and we can get a little bit of an update. And those of you who are Silver Spring customers, you can also listen to Mike Farrell on 2 different webinars with Silver Spring, recorded one at the very, very end of last year and one in the middle of 2011 if you want more details on OG&E's program. So with that, let's kick off into the content. I'm joined today by my colleague Matt Smith, who heads up our DSM business. Matt, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, Michelle. Happy to be on board.
All right. So we're going to discuss the overall idea of how the smart grid is changing DR, and we've had the opportunity to work with several of our customers on DR programs, some of them existing programs that they're running on our system, some of them legacy programs that they're thinking about how to make a transition. And so that breadth of experience has given us some insights into the benefits of leveraging the smart grid in running a DR program. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about where we've been and how the smart grid is changing the whole demand response experience, both for utilities, but then also for consumers themselves. So the first thing to think about in the context of the smart grid and its effect on DR is that Silver Spring brought a very broad view of the smart grid to how we think about all the applications. So we take the systemic view that says you're going to build a unified network that fundamentally links utility to homes and businesses in the service territory. And with that, then, you have a number of opportunities for changing the relationship with the consumer. With demand response, of course, that relationship is really critical, and you want to elevate that relationship. But that unified view that Silver Spring brings, where you're leveraging a common network for multiple applications, really fundamentally is that first notion of changing how you do DR. So with that context that Silver Spring took a different view, I'm going to first back up and ask Matt to take a minute and walk us through kind of the legacy challenges that utilities have been dealing with within DR, but then also more broadly within demand-side management.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. When we've talked to a number of our customers and looked at how they were running both broader demand-side management projects, but also a demand response specifically, some of the challenges that we saw around legacy programs first really dealt with the flexibility of those programs, and this stemmed everywhere from very siloed solutions where a single vendor was providing both the devices that went in the home, the installation services, the networking platform, the head-end software, even integration and marketing services. And while there was a simplistic factor there that often allowed utilities to get into those types of situations in a general way, without a lot of internal expertise, they also didn't offer the opportunities for multiple vendors getting in, utilities approaching it in a best-of-breed fashions. And also in the past, the technologies that were often leveraged, the technology platforms such as paging or other one-way delivery technologies, had very specific limitations that limited the flexibility of the programs. Oftentimes, solution was deployed specifically for direct load control, and it wasn't able to support other types of demand response programs. It was very, very specific purpose. And so these one-off solutions really limited the utilities' creativity and their flexibility in custom tailoring programs for individual customers or segments of their customer base. Another key challenge was always around measurement of what was actually the load shed that we got from this specific event. If we varied the tendency of who we targeted with that event, it was oftentimes very difficult to target specific groups and have an accurate expectation in terms of what the load shed would be or the things that were happening. Now, obviously, that's something that's addressed now with the smart grid and smart meters, but for most of the legacy programs, those types of capabilities didn't exist. So utilities tended to rely on small sample size testing programs where they put a metering device on individual premises, try to get a representative sample, and then derive their benefits from that. It also had a big impact on maintenance. People didn't know when switches or other products were not functioning, and so it really either increased the maintenance costs of those programs dramatically if you had to go out and visit every home to figure out which devices were working and not, or people just didn't respond or didn't do maintenance, and then you had a degradation in your load shed capability over time as more and more devices went offline as time went on. And so this measurement and verification of what happened was often something that came much later, 3 months in the rears. People would wait for it. You'd kind of figure out what happened in the season, and then you'd make your adjustments to the program for the next season. But there was not enough information to kind of make interstitial changes within a program, within a season, because that information just typically wasn't there to make good business decisions on. And then the other key challenge that we've always faced in the demand side management or DR program was just adoption, getting customers engaged. And typically customers had the option to engage in the program or not. Utilities could get some level of penetration, often in the 5 to 10% range. The highest we've ever seen when utilities were paying very strong dividends to the customer for participation was 25%, but that's kind of far and away, very, very, unusual in terms of the penetration of the programs. And so customers were not deeply engaged. They didn't have a lot of choices. They were either in or out. There wasn't opt-in and out. And that's something that we've looked at trying to address in how do we make the customer a more active participant in the program as we move forward. And they just often had not enough information to know whether the benefits that they were getting, from being a participant in the program.
So then with that, then we've had a few evolutions of different DSM kinds of programs, from pretty simple kind of EE, energy efficiency kinds of programs in the early days, and moving into more second generation programs where we had a little bit more technology that we could deploy. We could really do DR for peak management rather than just sustained baseline management. Walk us through a little bit about how this has evolved and kind of where we sit today with third generation.
Sure, yeah. I think there's really kind of two key categories of benefits that we see here in how the current generation of technology is enabling better performance around demand response. And the first one really comes around just being able to do what's been done in the past much more efficiently, with higher level of benefits, payback to utility, sometimes with specific cost improvements, but just better connectivity to device, two-way communications is enabling us to do what's been done in the past, direct load control, other types of programs, in a much more efficient way, thus increasing the benefit ratio to the utility. The second category where we really see this shifting is the ability to get customers engaged as an active participant in the program. And this means everything from being able to, not only enroll in the program and have a choice there, but choose whether they participate in individual events on specific days based on, convenience factor for them, but also being able to give more flexible choices, like we'll talk a little bit with OG&E, where the customer can actually choose daily whether to participate or not. And if they participate, they save money. If they don't participate, they pay a little bit more, but it gives them the choice, right? And so that's a whole aspect of this, is how do we give customers better information so they can understand their energy use, but then also give them the tools and the flexibility to decide how and when to participate based on their dynamics.
And that notion of putting the customer at the heart of the program is really foundational to the OG&E program as they've implemented it. So we'll get to that in 1 second. But one thing sort of caught my ear. You talked about the older days where you kind of outsourced the whole program and you were a little bit sort of hands-off as the utility, and the whole other entity did everything sort of soup to nuts. But now with the smart grid, you know, there could be this notion that, well, now I have a lot more work myself as the utility. You're putting me in charge. Now I'm becoming the integrator. But then you also talk about the notion of Silver Spring bringing a platform approach and taking this kind of unified view. Can you walk me through a little bit about where, you know, what does the platform approach buy me as a utility? What are some of those benefits? And how does it mitigate some of the risk of, don't I have a lot more work if I'm pulling together all the piece parts?
Sure. So I think the way to think about this, and it does really require kind of a mind shift in terms of how folks approach demand-side management, the idea of creating a platform in which you can run a broad range of programs and, you know, create common methodologies for, you know, communicating with devices in the home, having, you know, standards-based interfaces from that perspective, so you can choose devices from multiple vendors, not locked into any one specific thing, but that can work across a range of programs, from time of use rates to price response, where you're actually having devices respond to price signals, to direct load control, to, you know, peak time rebates, all running off a common platform with a common infrastructure around program management, being able to notify and message customers about the choices that they have in the programs when events are occurring, but also then common platforms for measurement and verification, so that you don't end up with all these silos of multiple, you know, groups implementing, you know, their one program, and then another group implementing their program in a different way, and another group implementing the program in yet a different way. You create a lot of efficiencies and cost savings by implementing this on a platform-based level. And the benefit of combining these with technologies like, you know, automated metering initiatives is that you now also get, you know, premise-level information about individual customers' participation in the program. You can use the meter data that's being captured for billing purposes and that interface into those areas to determine the level of participation that you're seeing on a customer-by-customer level. This lets you get much more targeted and focused in terms of what programs you roll out to individual customers, what are the benefits that are coming from that group, not only in aggregate, but looking at individual segmentation, you know, within your overall customer base. So you actually get to, you know, kind of more of a measured savings approach here, as opposed to kind of predicted savings model that works in aggregate that may vary greatly on the individual customer basis. You now can understand what those variations are across a whole range of customers. And again, it ends up being the typical bell-shaped curve, but it allows you to much more effectively target and manage that. And then the two-way communications from the platform perspective allows the customer to become, you know, a much more active participant in the program across a whole range of activities.
Okay. And that focus on the customer, you know, as I've heard Mike talk about the program that they've developed, Mike Farrell talk about the program that they've developed at OG&E. He's the head of customer programs there, and his, you know, the way he describes it is, we really wanted to put the customer first. The customer choice was really important. The customer needed to be in control, and this mentality seems to permeate, you know, every conversation I have with anybody at OG&E. Really, that emphasis. So thinking through their mentality, you know, they talk about the smart grid in a broad way, and they did so, it seems, right from the start. They were going to undertake an AMI deployment, and they recognized the opportunity, it seems, to leverage that for DR right from the get-go. And so this was not well, we'll do this first, and then later we'll layer something else in. So they saw that opportunity right at the start to build a unified system for AMI and DR. And, you know, Mike's talked about some of the simplification that's enabled, right? They built a common network, of course. But on top of that, little things like, well, they're not very little, but devising a common security architecture, right? So whatever they devised for the end-to-end flow from the head end all the way across the WAN into the utilities network and all the way to the endpoint at the home, they were able to think about that once systemically and then have that map out to anything else that they choose to do on that network. And so that has applied obviously to their DR deployment. So can you talk a little bit about how OG is taking a different approach? What has DR been historically? What are they doing differently? And maybe just give us a quick overview of OG's DR program.
Sure. So I think, OG has really kind of embodies this changing nature of DR in terms of how they've approached this. Primarily first by just putting the customer at the center of the program. They made a decision very early on that they didn't want to control customers' loads in their homes. Before they ever started any of these smart grid projects, OG had very, very high customer satisfaction ratings, which they've been able to maintain through the deployment of AMI, through the deployment of DR in a kind of very, very impressive way. But because of that, they were very, very customer-centric. And they wanted to deploy this in a way that put the choice of conserving or not conserving in the customer's hands. And so that's why they took this price response-based program and moving that to kind of full deployment. I think it was the first utility to actually take that pricing rate program combined with a device in the home that can actually receive the price over a smart grid network and then be programmed by the customer to respond automatically. So that is a new capability that has been deployed. OG is the first. They really kind of set the standard here. And the benefit of that is it puts the choice in the customer's hands. They can go to their thermostat and say, when the price is at 48 cents, here's what I want you to do. Either keep running the air conditioner because I want to stay cool, and I'll pay a little bit more for that, or I want you to conserve 5 degrees, and I'm willing to put up with the thing. And the customer can change that day to day if they want, right? It's all in the customer's hands. And so that's a very, very unique approach in terms of how they went after that. And then that's enabled by the smart grid platform, two-way communications, because not only do they have the network infrastructure to send the price over the network to the devices and then the Zigbee hand capability within the home, but they also have the metering capability in place. And they designed their meter network and their AMI system in the beginning to have the capacity for 20 to 25% of their customers to be on this special rate program. And those customers actually have meter reads that occur more frequently, every 15 minutes. If they're not on the special rate, they get a kind of hourly interval reads. And that was built into the beginning because they knew having that more higher resolution data for those customers on the DR program would benefit them in terms of measurement and verification, forecasting, but also giving customers real-time access, near real-time access to how much energy they're consuming so that the customers have the right information to make the right energy choices. And so you can see how it's very, very customer-centric. And so extending that, the rates that they implemented, I'll just spend a little bit of time on that because I think it's interesting. From a full deployment, they actually had started testing this 4 years ago. They had ran a couple of different pilots, but ultimately settled on what they call a variable peak pricing rate, which has 4 different prices. And the customer has to opt into this. They sign up for the rate. They get enabling technology or a web portal depending on their choice and segmentation of the customer. And then the rate varies anywhere from 5 cents in kind of nights and weekends up to 48 cents in case of a critical peak price day. And there's 2 prices in between that. And so that's broadcast the day ahead. Utility, it's communicated through web portals, through hand devices, through text messaging, through phone calls, depending on the choices that the customers made for notification. And then the customers, react, whether they pre-program the device or they take action that day. And this is a huge benefit for OG because, whether they're not dependent on whether or not people respond as long as they've signed up for the program, right? It's a choice in the hand, but if they don't respond, they make more money. If they do respond, then they have the peak reduction, right? So it works out, very, very favorably from that perspective. Again, but putting the customer first.
Right. but that rate delta is pretty significant, having a tenfold increase at peak rate. I've heard Mike talk about, that's one of the things that's made the program really effective.
Yeah,
and
that's critical. Part of this is not only the technology that Silver Spring is bringing to bear in terms of the smart grid network and all the capabilities. We've been priming the technology solution, but that technology wouldn't do any good without intelligent rate design, by OG&E and putting it together from a whole program perspective. And there's a lot of information and studies that have been done around the effectiveness of various variations in the low rate to the high rate, and kind of 10x, if you look at a lot of the Brattle Group studies, is where you start to see kind of a real benefit. And if you go much beyond that, you get a little bit more, but not a lot. And so they used a lot of the research that was done in the market to design that rate. But again, it's kind of great technology combined with intelligent rate design and ultimately effective marketing by the utility as well to make the program successful.
Yeah, and you see that thread repeated a lot in the public research on pricing-based systems, that they are demonstrated to work. They've been proven to work. I know that you're going to say his name, but Dr. Faruqi is always, we don't need to test this anymore. We know it works, so get on with it. So just taking a second to look at the Silver Spring DR platform, you touched on a number of the platform requirements in terms of what are you trying to do. You're trying to get this enabling technology, you're trying to effect a change for the customer, but how does that translate into how we designed our DR platform to deliver those particular benefits?
Yeah, there's a couple of key areas. Kind of open systems architecture has been critical for what Silver Spring has done, not only in the DR side, but AMI metering side. But we think about our platform as, as a strong platform that has open interfaces at either end, right? So third parties can come in and produce devices, whether they're thermostats, IHDs, load control devices, plug controllers, a whole range of devices can be integrated, with our gateway, which is essentially typically sits in a meter, within a home. We have devices where we have direct load control switches, which have our communications card integrated into those. And so we have multiple ways that third-party device manufacturers who can either produce appliances that go in the home or devices which control those appliances can integrate into our network at the premise side. And we do a lot of work with standards bodies, Zigbee, and other areas to make that as accessible as possible to as many groups of people as possible. The more devices that we can control, the bigger the ecosystem, the better our platform will perform. But it's not just at the premise level, it's also at the back office level. Everything from the utility systems, the CIS, the DMS, to other types of demand response applications like a DRMS can also integrate within our head end. And so having those open areas at both sides is really, really important.
And I think laying this out for folks to visualize, it just makes it very clear. We actually have a very similar drawing across all of our solution areas. Silver Spring is always looking at sort of this middle layer where common network, open interfaces, and a range of applications, but always tied down to partner devices integrating in from below and plugging into our network, and a whole range of customer applications at the top kind of plugging into our infrastructure as well.
Yeah, and this is what really provides the flexibility that hasn't been there in legacy solutions, in that we provide a generic communications platform, control platform, notification platform to interface with devices in the home. But then those systems can be integrated with other back-end software, back-end systems to custom tailor the type of control that you do for specific programs. And so you can kind of separate the technology communication level from the program management layer. And this allows you to get a lot more flexibility, even beyond the things that Silver Spring has necessarily dreamed up and built into our software applications. We can extend that with third-party applications.
Okay.
Another key thing is that this is a unified platform that utility can deploy this and use it for multiple programs. It's not specific to direct load control or price response or peak time rebate. but can be leveraged across many, many different types of programs, can be targeted to residential customers and commercial customers, as well as, a broad range of other capabilities. And so the idea is a platform for demand response, not just a point solution that does a specific thing. Right? And this is probably the key unique positioning that Silver Spring has in this area, where other vendors who are offering demand response solutions often are still very focused on an end-to-end solution. And so, we're much more focused on choice, getting utilities options in terms of the devices that they have, all running a common platform, and then plugging in different applications in the back end. Another key part here that I think is enabled through the platform is the idea that this becomes very customer-focused, but also measured at the premise level. Whereas before in legacy solutions, I mentioned that, you didn't really have premise-level measuring. Now that we have that, it creates a lot of flexibility in the types of programs you could do, how you would structure your incentives based on performance, whether that's price-based or participation-based incentive around there, because you have the two-way communication to know whether somebody participated or not, either from a direct response from the device or even just by looking at the metering data and what was actually achieved in terms of load shed versus a baseline forecast, which now can exist for literally every home, where before you might have only had a system-level forecast and what the response might be for a DR event at the system level. You can actually now have a premise-level baseline and response, at that level. So it creates a lot of flexibility, and this is probably a key point where I encourage the folks out there that are thinking about new DR programs. The real challenge that you have here is not necessarily how do you leverage these systems to do what you did in the past, because certainly they can do that and probably can deliver it with a higher benefit cost ratio than was provided before. But the real opportunity here is to think about how you use this capability in new ways, whether not just for peak capacity issues, but maybe you're using DR for reliability purposes, targeting events to specific feeders, or you're participating in an energy bidding program when you have excess capacity that you're not using for your own capacity purposes, and generating additional benefits by bidding that DR asset into an energy market. And so those things are only enabled when you have two-way communication, premise-level data, and can forecast in a very flexible way, based on actually measured past performance.
Okay. So go ahead and type any questions you might have for us as we move through some of this information. So we're going to step back and look again at OG&E's program. And some of the ways that Mike's talked about leveraging smart grid and the two-way nature of smart grid, just a simple case, and it sounds sort of straightforward, but it's proven very useful for them, understanding whether a given device is connected, what is sort of the device state of what's going on in that home. I know that when there's been customer outreach and customer support calls, having that kind of real-time connectivity understanding has been really crucial. And then that also feeds into what you were just saying about being able to predict at a much more granular level. We'll touch on that some more when we talk about the software capabilities. And then also, the hand space, because of the kind of the flux in the Smart Energy Profile SCP protocol, the ability to upgrade devices is something that they were also really concerned about. There's been some utilities that we've talked to who feel like things aren't quite baked enough, can't really get started. There's concerns around interoperability, but OG&E kind of went forward with a system-wide, put up your hand anywhere in the service territory if you want to be in this program. And they did that pretty early in terms of protocol interoperability. But part of their confidence seemed to have come from knowing that they could, just as we can push an upgrade to Silver Spring devices throughout our network, we could also similarly push an actual Zigbee update to a device, provided the device was capable of doing so. And that kind of capability gave them a little more confidence, I think, to move forward really broadly. And then also the ability to look at this consumption data like you're talking about and have that adjust their forecast much more close to the event and ahead of the event, and having real-time feedback during the event is, I think, something we're looking forward to a lot more this coming summer. So that's just a handful of ways that they can leverage the two-way capabilities. But moving forward, have you heard other ideas coming out of OG&E about opportunities that they can leverage smart grid, and what have they been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the benefits that come from having this platform in place, where they basically have a Silver Spring NIC and a meter in every home and business across their service territory at this point. They have customer-facing, web portal, customer engagement tool on the back end, ability to collect all that meter data, and then devices installed in the home where they have DR customers there. So it's very easy to use this infrastructure that's already deployed, add some incremental pieces to extend the capabilities. And so areas that have been discussed are prepay, pay-as-you-go capability. This can be simple extensions to the web portal, some additional systems installed on the back end, but leveraging all the existing meter infrastructure, network, communications flow, notification methodologies that already are in place for the DR program can be leveraged, for this pay-as-you-go. Things like peak time rebates and direct load control all could be implemented. Peak time rebates can be implemented today, basically just with some additional modifications on their billing end. Direct load control just by installing some new devices that is combined to the meter or communicate directly back through the mesh. All the existing back office infrastructure, the HCM head end, AMI, the demand optimizer software, which is a full-scale DRS, can all support that direct load control. So it's actually going to that capability as simple as installing a device and building a new program, the marketing and outreach associated, with that. So you start to see the benefits of building all this on a common platform. Things like being able to call events to those thermostats specifically for reliability purposes. You'd have to enroll a customer in that program, but all of that existing infrastructure could be used, to a different purpose. Same with market bidding into the area. There isn't actually an energy market in Oklahoma right now, but down the road there's talk that there may be. And so all that infrastructure could be re-leveraged to a greater advantage. So you start to then be able to think about, okay, I have these DR assets in the field, whether they're thermostats or load control switches, and people on a specific program. How do I create a new program with some incentives that could be rolled out to that customer and use that same infrastructure for other purposes? So that's the benefit of building on the platform and what we're really trying to create by having a common platform for demand-side management.
Okay. And OG, of course, has rolled out a price-based system. And we do have a quick question in about the pricing. Let's see if we know this answer. So for peak time rate plans, for peak time rebate rate plans, how are individual customer baselines established? Is it hour prior, multiple hours prior? Is there a seasonal baseline?
Yeah, typically this is done, this is actually part of the rate case development that would be done for peak time rebate, and there are different methodologies. I'm not so familiar with each of the ones, but I can say that the way that Silver Springs is implementing this is that we have a demand optimizer software which actually does establish a baseline for each customer, and that's done with a variable algorithm. So we have different methodologies we can use, and if there is a specific methodology required by the rate case that isn't one we can support, we can plug in a methodology. And so the way that this would be done is that you would want to have advanced metering deployed for that customer. You would design the program, sign them up, and then we would track through the meter data, create a baseline for each customer based on the approved methodology, and then would basically create a reconciliation file of what was actually saved during a peak time event day versus what the baseline was. And so we fully support that capability in the demand optimizer software that we're deploying. And there is sometimes some tailoring required depending on what the commission has approved, for the baseline calculation, but there's different methodologies that are often used, and we just need to zero in on what the specific one was.
Okay. So OG's price-based system is unique right now. They're the only ones doing full, across their service
least at this
territory,
scale.
smart grid, full smart grid based system. But let's touch on what's actually the more common approach to DR and look at load control. So here again, Silver Spring, again, taking this broad network point of view, taking this multi-device view and this open infrastructure perspective, has kind of ratcheted up what's possible with load control by bringing these kinds of switches directly onto the Silver Spring network. So we've integrated our communications module into load control switches from a couple of different providers. We're expanding this list as well. And can you step through a little bit about these numbers? These are pretty compelling numbers. How are we achieving these benefit increases over the traditional approaches with paging or with Zigbee?
Yeah. So what we see is that primarily these greater benefits all derive from having highly reliable two-way communications with the device. So a lot of this is in terms of paging coverage. There are often holes in terms of places where it won't reach other areas. It's one way, so you don't know if it's working. So oftentimes they're not maintained on a regular basis, and then you get degradation over time. So with the Silver Springs technology, you always have continuous communication with that device. If you lose that, then you know the device has gone offline for some reason. It's not there. We can still communicate with the NIC. We can interrogate the device. There's remote maintenance that can be done over the air that could not be done with previous technology. That can save on truck rolls. But you will know if you need to roll a truck specifically for that device, and that's just not been the case before. And so there are a lot of benefits that derive from that capability in terms of being able to have higher predictability, more reliability around the communications. In terms of Zigbee, similar, we have a much higher reliability than what we've seen in paging in the past. But still, Zigbee getting into the home, unless there's a lot of devices deployed, it's a meshing technology, so sometimes it has challenges penetrating, and so that's why you see improvement, but not as much as what you would have with direct grid communication with Silver Spring, which is the higher power radio, stronger mesh networking, in terms of connectivity to the device. And so most of that really derives, from, kind of those key areas.
And once again, given the fact that we want to partner with multiple providers, we're reemphasizing this ability to provide our customers with lots of choice over what their solutions are. And then tying this all together, again, whether it's price response or load control, next generation DRMS, demand response management system, that we announced back in January, we're delivering GA this month?
Yeah, this week.
This week, very exciting. And we're excited about the launch of Utility IQ Demand Optimizer. And there have been webinars on this in the past, so anybody on the phone who wants to understand a little more about Demand Optimizer, there's deep dive recordings that you can go listen to in the library. But just give us a quick snapshot, Matt, of what's in this software, how is it different, and how is this affecting utilities' abilities to drive more dynamic programs?
Yeah. So from my perspective, this is the first software application at a DRMS level. It's really been designed from the ground up to truly leverage the huge amounts of data that can be generated from the smart grid in terms of meter input, and not just the hourly reads, but even getting down to a 15-minute read, or honestly even much more deeper in terms of 5-minute or 1-minute is even possible with this application. It may not be required based on what's needed, but it is capable of handling huge amounts of data in real time and coming back with not only a view of what happened once an event was completed in a particular premise, but actually also being able to forecast what an event likely would be in advance. And then if you know that premise by premise level, it's also really good at then aggregating that information in a dynamic group, kind of in real time, to be able to tell you what you would get from a system-wide event, what you would get from an event on this feeder, what you would get from an event to this particular customer segment. And those can all be created very, very dynamically because we're actually calculating baseline and forecast on a premise by premise level. And so this enables a lot of capability. It gives you a unified way to approach demand response, even demand side management programs. We can do M&V on a pure price program that has no automated control, just by put a customer on this rate, and it has specific characteristics, and then we measure the meter, and we can establish that versus a baseline, what happened on that rate versus other things. So it gives the utility a way to unify all of their DSM programs, the measurement and forecasting of that, into a common platform. And that can extend even beyond the Silver Spring platform. So certainly it's deeply integrated with Utility IQ and the other applications there that comes out of the box. So often we've seen utilities have a 9 to 18-month project to integrate other third-party software depending on their approach. This removes a lot of that integration work because we've already have it all pre-integrated. But then also enables you to integrate with other headends. And so these could be legacy systems where you have a legacy paging network and you're trying to do the measurement in M&V on that system. And so we can bring all of this together into a unified view of all your DR assets. And then we actually have algorithms in the software to help the utility optimize how to call events across those programs. And if you just have one program and you only call it in one way, that's fairly simplistic. But if you have different types of events you're calling through a program, reliability events, capacity events, energy bidding programs, how do you decide as a utility, what events to call when, which programs to use for what, how do you get to a specific, megawatt savings goal? And this software takes all of that information, all the analytics that's in there, and can make an efficient recommendation on the most efficient way to call a series of events across multiple programs and systems.
And so it's becoming almost like, in the IT analogy world, almost like a manager of managers. So
Absolutely.
It becomes this Uber program manager that can then parse out commands to other programs. So you're not even necessarily disrupting that other infrastructure. You just have this more intelligent planning brain at the center of it all, and control brain at the center of it all. And then you talked about the optimization. So all of this, I'm assuming, is somehow also taking into account the business logic, how many events a given person can be subject to, or the frequency, or how recently they were called to an event, things like that.
Yeah, great point, Michelle. It has a full kind of business rule engine in it. And so when it's doing this optimization, it's taking into account not only the program rules that have been maybe established by the commission, number of hours that a device can be in control over a summer, how many events can be dispatched, whatever those rules are, but also any business logic that's been applied. Like if the utility has realized over the course of running the program that doing events in 3 consecutive days increases churn by X%, you might not want to do that. So you can program that rule into the engine, into the program engine, and the software automatically manage that it doesn't call X number of days an event for utilities. So there's a lot of flexibility there in terms of how you design the program rules, but it will manage that for you. In the same way it actually will manage notification. So you build this in, and then the software has a notification engine in it. It can send text messages, it can send email, it can generate IVR phone calls automatically. And so all of these things, being able to have the business rules and a notification process that's basically been systematized, as opposed to somebody hitting sending to an email list manually, which has a high level of human error potentially in it, and that itself can increase churn. We can reduce overall churn, and then by understanding what the likely response is by particular customer segments, we can also help with the targeting and marketing of the program as well to reduce overall customer acquisition costs as well.
So happier customers, better penetration, and longer involvement, longer participation in the program.
Correct.
So for OG&E, they've had some really fabulous updates to their commissions and won some amazing awards. And I thought we would just highlight a few of their impressive results. So the foundation of their program is twofold. They have the programmable communicating thermostat that to which they send the price message day ahead. And that avenue has had really dramatic results, an average of 33% peak reduction. And I think I recall seeing from their commission filings that it's been as high as 58%. The other thing I think is important to note is OG&E has also rolled out the Silver Spring customer portal, Customer IQ. It's tailored for OG&E, it looks like OG&E for their customers. It's all integrated into their website. But those customers that are just getting information, so not any kind of set and forget automation with the thermostat, but just information, those customers are seeing an 11% on average decline in peak. And these savings are translating into real meaningful dollars. So $191 per customer was what they achieved last summer for the participating customers. And as you noted, they started with very high customer satisfaction. They've got an incredibly strong brand, very, very popular brand in the state. And winning the J.D. Powers Customer Sat Award is yet another testimony to how they've maintained that. So you've talked to Mike about future directions that the program can go. Can you share a little bit about what they're thinking about in terms of enhancements?
Yeah, I mean, I think as they scale up the number of customers, so certainly they were at about 40,000 customers last year. This summer, or this spring and summer, they hope to add about another 40,000. Ultimately, at the end of year 3, they want to get to 120,000. So some of the thinking that's happening here is the way that the rate case is done right now is that there are these 4 different price points. All customers basically get the same price, and that has not that has to be it's basically written into the rule depending on what the cost of energy that energy's spot market pricing is. Then that determines the price. So it's a fairly fixed program. There's not a lot of judgment in it in terms of what the price is going to be in day-to-day, other than the critical peak pricing, which they can call at any time for X number of hours, and with at least 2 hours advance notice they need to give. So as you look at this, I think some of the question when you get to very large numbers, how do you start to segment that population where you send the price out, you see this big drop, and then if it's a very, very hot day, you start to get some decay over time. And so your load shed at the end of the period is not going to be as high as it was at the very beginning. And so there's some strategies that we've already implemented there around pre-cooling and other things, but one of the things we're thinking about is how do you create more flexibility within the program rules to be able to extend that peak period and have a larger shed towards the end, so you're kind of covering the full area. And so this gets into a bit of how the rate is designed, what flexibility there is to call events or prices to different groups of customers, and certainly these are things that aren't in the current rate case, but thinking about flexibility in the future that could provide that capability. And certainly the capabilities are there within the system to do that if it's determined that it's the right approach from a design perspective. That separately could be augmented by some other group of customers that are on a direct load control, and you're carving out, basically managing the load shed through some other type of program as well. And so we're looking at multiple ways to go do that type of stuff.
That makes sense. So we've had some good questions come in. We've finished our prepared remarks, so to speak, so we'd love to hear from you. One of the questions that came in was asking about customer information for the notification. How is that information managed? Can a customer update his or her own information about how they get notified?
Yes, they can, both in the OG program and in our demand response optimization software. There is a way to update that information. Our intention would be is that either through our Customer IQ web portal, people can update how they want to be notified, and then that gets passed along to the various systems that require that information. Or if the utility has a customer-facing information system or login account, my account area, they can put those notification preferences in there, and then we can pass it through APIs to the system. So we have both a kind of a way that the customer touches, so we can deliver the capability directly to the customer, or you can integrate it into your existing website, those options, and then basically through an API pass that information to us as a CIF data update.
And the nice thing there would be the level of integration amongst the various Utility IQ modules probably makes some of that process a little simpler. If you've already got the hooks into the CIS for other program reasons or other
Correct.
Initiatives.
Silver Spring goal would be we'd implement that in one place with the utility, and then that information would flow through the rest of our systems.
Yeah, all right. So a question came up about network design. It's a good question. If the demand response devices are part of the Silver Spring network, connected directly into that utilities network rather than over Zigbee, what does that mean for the rest of the network infrastructure? Are there additional access points that are needed, for example? Let me look for a little bit more detail he's saying. What's the impact on the overall communications performance when you're adding more devices?
Yeah, so I mean, the shorter answer is it depends on a couple things. It depends primarily on the performance that you require for the dispatch of the event. And so if you, typically our meter ratios are, for an AMI deployment are typically in the 5,000 to 1 range. That's probably good enough for about a 5-minute dispatch window. Generally speaking, obviously, it depends a lot on your actual network configuration, and we can, give you those stats specifically for your network. But if that type of performance is required, in that level, probably no change is required. But if you want to get down to, kind of 2-minute dispatch or even lower windows, then there are typically some additional access points that need to be added to change the ratio of device endpoints to access points, which will increase the throughput. The good news is that all you have to do is go out and install those access points. The mesh reforms. We can target specific areas where there's higher concentrations of DR customers. So there's a lot of tactics that can be taken in there, but it really depends on the performance that you need for the DR event. And so, like OG is doing day ahead, so absolutely zero issue, right? They need, or a 2-hour advance window is what they need for CPP. So no problem there with their existing network. We do have other customers who are looking at much tighter windows, and we are designing networks specifically to meet those requirements. So I'd encourage you to reach out to your Silver Spring folks. This is a conversation that we'd be happy to have with you in detail based on your specific network design.
But given penetration rates, it's not like you're sitting there doubling your meter base. Right, so you're not looking at major increases in the network infrastructure.
And I'm not really seeing it, and in most cases, with the exception of like very, very fast second deployment, the additional network infrastructure can totally be supported in a business case, for the benefits that you would get from the demand response, because in aggregate, it's just not that much money compared to the cost of the endpoint and installation and all the other things.
Exactly, that makes a lot of sense. So there's a question about technical specifications and open ADR. And so the question is asking whether the Utility IQ software, so I'm presuming that the demand optimizer module that we have in this particular case, whether that's compliant with open ADR.
Yeah, great question, actually. It is supporting OpenADR 1.x. We have a new version that will be released a little bit later this summer that would support OpenADR 2.0. And right now, the way that we're leveraging that is that it would communicate those OpenADR signals directly across the internet to a building management system or a device typically installed in C&I facilities. OpenADR can certainly be leveraged for residential. I think from a Silver Spring perspective, we see it mostly targeted at C&I right now. And that's a capability that is in that first release of that software. We can send that out. We can integrate, on the C&I side. I will say, just as a note, we are thinking about ways that those OpenADR signals could transverse across the Silver Spring network, but aren't yet quite ready to talk about that in detail yet. But if you guys have any specific applications where you're looking at OpenADR, I'd love to get into a more detailed conversation with you around that and how you're thinking about leveraging it.
So the deployment is still common back office software with Demand Optimizer, but the flows of the different kinds of dispatch are different. So in the case of a load controller or price response message, it's flowing over the Silver Spring network.
Yep.
And in the case of an OpenADR command, it's leveraging broadband.
Correct, and the transport is invisible to the user of the software. They just see there's devices or premises enrolled in this program, premises enrolled in that program. They can optimize across that. They can call events across those things. And so you can start to see how that kind of unified feature can work across, multiple programs, multiple dispatch, mediums.
Okay, Great. Well, great questions from the audience. Again, our apologies that we weren't able to include OG&E today. I'm sure that we'll have them on again shortly in the future. You've asked some great questions. We've had wonderful attendance today. Thank you so much for your time. And again, those of you who are Silver Spring customers, you can look forward to seeing this recording posted on Springboard tomorrow. Thank you again for your time, and we'll see you back online in a few weeks' time. Bye-bye.